Hello, and welcome to another live chapter reading of Unabridged by Melinda D. Ross, as presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Have you ever had one of those days when you thought you'd finally arrived? That was the way I felt that morning as I walked to work in downtown Seattle. Everything started with a popular book about BDSM, an idea I had for a tongue-in-cheek article about it and the genre in general. I don't have any strong opinions either way about said book or its particular theme, but the subject matter was too juicy not to milk. While it occurred to me that the book's supporters, more numerous than those who espouse the Bible, might be upset, I'd hoped Howie, my much despised and highly annoying editor-in-chief, would agree to let me run with it. In the event he wouldn't, my plan B was a speech prepared on why this satire feature should appear in Unabridged, the literary magazine I worked for. Howie Stewart was a small, paunchy man with bad breath and rounded, dandruff-covered shoulders that reminded me of donuts sprinkled with sugar. Ours was a mutual love-hate relationship. The only reason he'd hired me had been because of my writing abilities and useful connections not only in the city but beyond. In his mind, I was an overachieving feminist hunting for his job. He was right up to a point, but I didn't want his job. At the moment, being editor-in-chief wasn't my life's ambition. I was content with my position because it gave me the freedom to write about what I liked, for the most part, and freelance an article or two whenever I found something interesting to pursue. As soon as I reached the office building where the magazine was headquartered, I headed straight to the elevators, miraculously finding one that was almost empty. The occupant, a middle-aged man I didn't recognize, with a body heading in the same direction as Howie's, smiled at me. "Floor?" He gave me the once-over, his grin telling me he liked what he saw, as if that should somehow make my day. "7, please." I turned away to avoid eye contact with the Lothario, the last thing I needed this morning. I'd never thought of myself as a bombshell, but I was often ogled by men. Most of the time, I didn't appreciate it, unless the ogler looked like Gerard Butler. Not that it ever happened. Annoyed, I turned to the mirrored wall to check if I had suddenly turned into a juicy piece of meat, which might have justified this guy's stare. Nope. I was the same 25-year-old woman, with dark blonde hair that brushed my shoulders, green eyes enhanced by gray eyeshadow, and lips colored my favorite shade of mauve. The stranger's gaze roamed along my body, starting at my patent leather-heeled pumps, moving up my legs to the hem of my short black skirt, lingering along the curves created by the push-up bra I wore under the fitted blouse and jacket of my business suit. His leering was starting to make me uncomfortable, but thankfully the elevator door opened. I rushed out without looking back, took a deep breath to settle my nerves, and headed straight to Howie's office, not giving myself time to reconsider approaching him. This was my moment. Isabel Berkeley, Belle to her friends and co-workers, had left her office door ajar. I could see her on the phone through the crack, a cute, petite, curly blonde dynamo, but I didn't pause to say hi. I hurried down the hall to Howie's office and stopped in front of the door. I cleared my throat, took another cleavage-expanding gulp of air, and knocked twice. Without waiting for a reply, I burst in. "You're gonna love me." I did once. I stopped dead, one heeled foot in midair, miraculously managing to stay upright and not end up face down on the floor. Behind Howie's desk sat my nemesis, Blade Spencer, the first man I'd ever loved. The brief time we'd spent together had been the most beautiful period of my life. As I stood there staring at him, bittersweet memories flooded me. I recalled picnics in the forest, walks in summer rain, strolls in the park, stolen kisses, hours spent making love, and promises of eternal bliss. That last thought brought me back. Our relationship hadn't ended in eternal bliss. Far from it. "Hello, Angelina." His deep, husky voice rumbled through me. Blade was the only one, other than my mother in a rage, who'd ever used my full name. As I grasped the reality of the situation, my heart pounded so hard. I was certain he could hear it. Heat rushed to my cheeks, and at that moment, I was probably redder than any cosmetic blusher could make. "Blade, The word gushed out of me, and I steadied myself on the back of the chair in front of Howie's desk. What are you doing here? I work here. This had to be a joke. Work here? In this building? I squeaked, swallowing the panic rising within me. This couldn't be happening. This very office, he grinned, making the acid in my stomach roil. I hadn't seen him in 3 years. Blade was nearly 6 years older than I was, and looked his age. Fine lines were etched around his eyes and mouth. Somehow he was even more attractive than when I'd last seen him. His white short-sleeved shirt was unbuttoned at the neck, with his gray silk tie loosened, revealing a few inches of tanned skin. Under those classy clothes was the body I'd craved from the moment we'd met. My Adonis was tall and broad-shouldered, subtly well-muscled, not in the bodybuilder way that appealed to many. My gaze caught on his beautifully shaped mouth. His lips weren't full, nor were they overly thin. In truth, unshaven as he was, his mouth resembled an alluring soft island in the middle of the dark stubble covering the lower part of his face. I could taste him and the incendiary kisses we'd shared years ago. I'm your new editor-in-chief. The words slowly sunk in. I swallowed and lifted my stunned gaze to meet his chocolate brown eyes. You've got to be kidding, I said, my voice strangled, my eyes wide. The intensity with which he watched me, far less restrained than Elevator Man's had been, made me more aware of every inch of my body. Suddenly, my fitted jacket was uncomfortably tight. His expression hardened. No, Angelina, I assure you, I'm not joking. I'm your new boss. If you spent more time at the office working, you would know that Howie retired last month and moved to San Francisco. I stiffened. Had he just insinuated that I wasn't doing my job? I can't write about book launches or other related events sitting behind a desk all day. Howie understood that. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. At least you're here now. Sit down. I want to talk to you about what I see happening in this place. He gestured to the chair I was leaning against. This had to be a bad dream. It was true. It had been a couple weeks since I dropped by the office, sending my work in electronically, but Belle would have told me that if we had a new boss, wouldn't she? As though reading my mind, Blade smiled, but his eyes didn't. No one knew exactly when the change was going to happen. Today's my first official day in the chair. I intend to do some revamping around here, and you'll be part of that. My gut tightened. Revamping? What do you mean? Suspicion replaced my shock and surprise. Having Blade Spencer as a boss would be bad enough, but surely he wasn't planning to fire me. There are some people who do more procrastinating than creating on this team. I plan to make sure everyone has enough work to do, and that they complete all of their assignments properly and on time. Praying I appeared professional rather than dumbstruck, I sat and crossed my legs. I hadn't seen him in more than 3 years, but there was a newfound maturity about him that increased rather than diminished his sex appeal. His gestures, his speech were those of a man in charge, a man who followed his path to success and knew where he was going. Why were you so excited when you came in? My gaze jumped to his face and my cheeks burned. What? When you came in, you seemed excited about something, he said, as if he were talking to a small child, fueling my embarrassment. This wasn't the Blade I knew. Who was this cold stranger with the professional mannerisms and steely gaze that didn't hint at any of his humanity or emotions? If that was the game he wanted to play, fine. I reached into my handbag and handed him the folder containing my carefully crafted satire. In the heat of the moment, I'd forgotten all about it and the reason I was here today. Scraping together the shreds of my dignity, I smiled and held out the folder. I had an idea for an article last night that I believe would be a great fit for my column. He nodded and reached out to take the folder. His fingers brushed mine, heat filling me. Glancing up, I read the same deep yearning that had been burned inside me since the last time we'd been together. I'd never stopped wanting him. Was it just my imagination, or did his eyes mirror my emotions? He withdrew his hand quickly, and the spell was broken. Reaching into the folder, he removed the sheets of paper and proceeded to read aloud, one hand absently rubbing his chin as he did. Billionaires, BDSM, and blah, blah, blah. He stopped after the title, cocked an eyebrow at me, and a slight sneer on his face, but didn't say a word. He began reading once more, his tone emotionless. No one can deny that BDSM romance has become a trend for quite some time. I heard about a few of these books from a couple of friends who were besotted with them. I'd never read this type of literature, and as a journalist, I was curious to see what all the fuss was about. As I do with most new products, I read the reviews first and was intrigued by their degree of contradiction. Some readers found the books to be brilliant, while others claimed they were trash, and just about every description in between. More curious than ever, I turned to the books themselves, skimming each one carefully, trying to form an objective and educated opinion. Unfortunately, despite all my dedication to my research, I'm still not sure what exactly it is about this kind of novel that has inspired a mass phenomenon. At first, I thought it was the sex. I mean, whether we want to admit it or not, we all enjoy a little smut. Some tasteful, others downright filthy. It's a matter of choice, and one of those situations where there's no right or wrong decision. I confess, I don't know anything about the BDSM lifestyle. What I did note is that the eroticism, specifically in the forms of BDSM books, has become a growing trend that sells billions annually, primarily to women. Why is this? One reviewer described it as a regression from women to females. Another reviewer said she loved to practice BDSM because she felt empowered. I was disappointed she didn't give more details about that. Does she mean to like to be dominated? If that's the case, then I suppose most women can relate. Even in the animal kingdom, more often than not, the female cedes control to the male, relying on him for protection and safety. The man is usually in control, on top more often than not, and I can't say I dislike that. Blade stopped reading, his eyebrows notching up another half-inch, making me squirm in my chair. He cleared his throat and continued, his voice hiding whatever he was thinking or feeling. Getting back to the first reviewer, she made an interesting point as well. I think women like her created feminism. So, can a woman who likes to be in control enjoy BDSM as a submissive? I can't quite picture Cleopatra, for instance, with her ass in the air in front of Caesar getting whipped. If there were any whipping going on in that royal relationship, I'd bet she was the one wielding the lash. And come to think of it, this brings to mind a playful side I'd never imagined I'd discover about BDSM. For now, though, I plan to stick with classical romance, with its hearts and flowers, rather than handcuffs and spankings. Call me old-fashioned, but at heart I'll forever be in love with Mr. Darcy. And this might prove my next point. It might not be the sex that has all these readers begging for more. In my opinion, it's the billionaire factor that shows up in many of these romances and makes this kind of literature appealing. Let's face it, many women dream of being swept away by some rich, powerful, good-looking, well-endowed, and possibly even a little kinky CEO, chic, unknown, royal fantasy creature, or even an alien. But is this truly love? Is it even romance? Would it be glamorous if you controlled everything you did? If you had to ask for money to buy deodorant or tampons? Not to me. We all have different definitions of what we see as romantic. What's yours? Write and tell me about it. The unabridged version, please. Wink, Angela Jameson. Blade was quiet, his gaze fixed on these pages. Hearing it aloud helped me get a different perspective of my work. Perhaps I'd been too harsh, too judgmental. I hadn't spoken of the literary value of the books, only the subject matter. And Unabridged was first and foremost a literary magazine with high standards. Maybe my language had been a little too coarse. If I'd used ass and a few other crass words, it was because I'd gotten carried away with the topic. Those words could always be replaced, right? I swallowed and looked up at him, nervously watching his face, waiting for a reaction. Any reaction. Finally, he lifted his gaze to me. You don't seriously expect this to appear in Unabridged, do you? I swallowed, suddenly missing Howie for the first time ever. Chapter 2. My gut in knots, I turned to bravado to carry me through the rest of what was becoming a disastrous interview. No one had ever read my work to me, and then used that tone of voice or critically face on me. Why not? I bristled, hoping I looked scandalized and insulted rather than chastised. This is a scathing mocking of the genre. Blade arranged the sheets and placed them on his desk. It's too critical, and it may very well turn public opinion against the magazine itself. That's ridiculous. It's a satirical look at the topic, I countered, irritated by his smugness. It's a perfectly objective and respectful opinion piece designed to engage the reader and start a dialogue. I made it clear that I have no strong opinions for or against that particular genre. I've read thousands of reviews that were downright judgmental, far more so than anything I opted to use in there. One of the reviews stated that, and I quote, "She was sick of sex heroes with incredible bodies, identical large penises, who never worked out but had billions and spent all of their time fucking incredibly beautiful but imbecile heroines. Isn't that why we're called Unabridged? Don't we express our opinions freely without sugarcoating anything?" His mouth twisted wryly as he listened to me building my case. His lips twitched. "I thought all women dreamt about billionaires with large penises." "Shows how much you know," I scoffed. "That's one of those ridiculous convictions men have. Women don't care about the size of the equipment, but about the technique in which it's used. A penis that's too large is actually a liability. It has to fit somewhere, and few, if any, women have cow-sized vaginas." I shrugged and looked away, my cheeks burning, my temperature rising as the discussion heated. I didn't dare meet Blade's glare, but I could feel him watching me as I stood and moved to the large window behind him. That's all for today. Hope you enjoyed the chapter reading.